Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to another Lighthinking conference. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Today, we have a very interesting conference. We're lucky enough to have Nick Turpin from London with us today. Nick is one of the founders of what we know as street photography, otherwise known as candid public photography. Nick has been working with this type of photography for over 30 years. He's one of the, like I said, one of the founders of the original tactics and strategies of how photographs on the street are taken. He's an incredible observer of people. He looks at the world in a different way than you and I. So we're very lucky to have him here today. Please give him your full attention. The speech will be about 45-50 minutes, more or less, and then there'll be some time for questions. So hold your questions to the end, and pass the floor over to Nick. Thank you, Nick.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you for having me here. I've come to take some photographs for Iguzini this evening. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sort of who I am, my early career, a little bit about street photography, and I'm going to show you some of the projects that I work on in public places, and just explain a little bit the reasons why I take the kind of photographs I do and why I think it's important. So I'll dive straight in. I've got quite a lot to show you. If you have any questions along the way, put your hand up, and we can answer them straight away. Otherwise, you'll forget them. I studied a degree in photography, film and video. That's me when I was about 20, at the University of Westminster in London. And at the end of my second year, I had this amazing break. I was offered a job with a national newspaper in the UK, The Independent. And The Independent was an amazing newspaper at the end of the 80s. It was changing the way that photography was used in newspapers. And I was lucky enough to be there and help them develop that style of working. And it's where I really learnt to become a photographer. One of the nicest aspects of my work at The Independent was just the fact that I had access to the most amazing things, to people, to like world events, history happening. So I spent my 20s traveling the world and photographing all these fascinating things. And my favorite part was the portraits that I made. I used to cover Cannes Film Festival every year and got to meet a lot of those sort of film stars. This is Anthony Hopkins. I'm sure you'll recognize these people. This is just a selection of some of the people that I did in my, when I was 22, 23, my early career. This is Helena Bonham Carter and Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin. This is not street photography, but it's just my early years. This is Seal. So I had to learn to make pictures very quickly. I wouldn't have very long with these people, so I'd have to walk in, and while I'm shaking their hand, I'd be looking around the room for a nice background or a chair that I could use, some idea that I could create a photograph out of that would be interesting. And sometimes I would only have 10 minutes to do this. Sometimes I would go to people's homes. This is Charlie Watts, the drummer of the Rolling Stones, at his home in Cornwall. And I spent a couple of hours with him while we were waiting for our journalist to come. And I was really just trying to capture these people the way that they were. So even early on, I was a documentary photographer. That's been the theme throughout my last 30 years. My street photography is part of the documentary tradition in photography, and so was my early newspaper work. So I was at The Independent for 9 years, and after a while, I realized there were lots of other things that you could do in photography, and I was becoming aware of street photography at that time. And street photography is very time-consuming. I spend days, weeks, walking the streets, looking for unusual things to happen in the everyday. And that takes a lot of time, sometimes 7, 8 hours a day. Often I'll come back with nothing, And to finance this, I started doing advertising work. So, and advertising allows me to make a lot of money in a short space of time. So this is me working in New York on an advertising campaign for IBM. And this is the poster that came from it. And so even in my advertising work, I'm using this kind of observed style. So advertising agencies will pay me to shoot like documentary, observed kind of street photography for them. But for me, really, it's just a way of financing my personal projects. Also do a little bit of fashion work, do all sorts of photography, but always working on the streets. Sometimes I use the street as a studio. This is an ad campaign for Gibson guitars that ran on London buses. So the work that I do commercially is very varied. And then the other aspect to my career is the teaching that I do. Photography has become incredibly popular now. Everybody's a photographer. You're all photographers. And the thing that everybody wants to know is how to be a better photographer. And so for people like me who've been doing it a long time, I get asked to do a lot of this sort of thing. I teach at photography festivals, at universities. I've taught on the Discovery Channel. And this is teaching for Apple in London. And I think one of the big things I do when I'm teaching is try and teach people the difference between a photograph and a picture. Millions of photographs are taken every day, but not so many pictures. And I try to teach people the difference between a photograph and a picture and how to make your photographs become pictures. So when I was working for the independent newspaper, I always had a camera with me, and I always was looking out for the unusual in the everyday. Any little thing which I thought was an interesting situation, I would stop, park my car, jump out. This is at Harvey Nichols in Knightsbridge in London, and I just saw these men unloading this lorry of mannequins, and I would just take a couple of rolls of film, watch them, see if anything interesting happens. So this is where I was starting to kind of practice my skills, composing, capturing moments. But at this time, I wasn't really aware of this phrase street photography. I was just doing something that I love to do, influenced by some of my heroes, photographers like Elliot Erwitt, the American photographer Elliot Erwitt, and people like Henri Cartier-Bresson. This is the Lord Mayor's New Year's Day parade in London. So I'm looking for quirky, unusual, kind of witty things which most people just walk past and don't see. For me, a line of crosses on the pavement is an opportunity, and I might spend an hour watching them. And of course, anywhere that the public come and go, doesn't have to be just the street, it can be in a park, or an art gallery or a museum, then I go watching people. So while I was still working for the newspaper, I spent my weekends in the Tate Gallery in London, just with a simple camera. And this is one of the things I love about street photography is that we can all do it. You can do it with a mobile phone. You don't need expensive equipment. I just use a tiny little camera like this, which is very discreet and very quiet. Street photography it all happens up here. It's an intellectual process. It's all about seeing things. The actual recording of it with a camera is just the last part of the act. So these pictures are exhibited at the Tate Britain in an exhibition called A Camera in the Tate. Okay, my last year at the independent newspaper, this book arrived on the picture desk, and it was called Bystander, A History of Street Photography. And the book arrived because they needed it photographing for the book review and the arts pages. And I had a look through this book, and I realized that I was a street photographer. This is what I've been doing for the last 7 or 8 years for myself, I discovered that there was a long heritage, a long tradition of this sort of photography. And so I devoured this book and learned all about it. And that really was a changing point for me. It made me realize what the possibility was of making a single picture, rather than shooting a story with lots of pictures, the power of one self-contained frame, one self-contained story. So in this book, I found this picture. And this is by a New York photographer called Joel Meyerowitz. He's now in his 80s. He's quite an elderly man now. And he took this picture while he was traveling in Paris in 1967. And I looked at this picture, and I just thought it was amazing. It was full of information, lots of things going on. And first of all, I saw this man with a hammer stepping over this guy on the ground, and I thought, this is a really funny photograph. It looks like he's knocked him on the head with a hammer, and he's stepping over him. I thought, this is a really humorous observation. And then I realized this guy is actually, he's all in blue overalls. He's a working class construction worker. And this guy on the ground is a very smart guy in a suit with a shirt and tie. And there's actually a really nice clash of class going on here. Not just a physical clash, but kind of a cultural one. And then the more I looked, I realized that actually there's 14 people in this picture, none of whom are going to help this man who's on the floor. And he's not a drug addict or an alcoholic, he's like us. He has smart shoes, he's wearing a suit, he's like one of us. And I think that's why everyone is so paralyzed. You see this guy here, he's holding a magazine to his cheek. He's paralyzed. They can't go and help. He's like them, and they could be lying on the floor in the same way if the day had gone differently. So I realized actually, instead of being a funny photograph, it's actually quite a tragic photograph in some ways. And then I love the sight lines, the way that everybody's looking, everyone in the photographing is looking in this way. The picture's beautifully constructed by the photographer. And then the photographer has tilted the camera, so the horizon line is tilted. It looks like the earth has moved, and this man has fallen over. And then, how has Joel Meyerowitz made this picture? What tools did he have? All he had was the frame that he threw around the scene, just this rectangle, which all photographers have, and the shutter button. Just those two tools. He's editing space with the frame, he's editing time with the shutter button. Now, nearly all good street photographs, those two decisions are made really, really well in the same frame. There's a great moment and a beautiful composition. Now, the other interesting thing to me is the historical and documentary aspect of photography. This is the junction now. This is the same junction. That's where the fallen man was. And you can see how things have changed. There's a Japanese tour party. There's advertising up here. There's people on mobile telephones. There's immigrant families in the community. Everybody in the first picture was white. The culture in Paris has changed in those years. Even the beautiful Art Nouveau railings in the previous picture have gone. So every picture that I take on the street, it adds to the historical record, and I realize how important that was. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of is that my work is in the collections of museums, because it adds to that history of our society. So that one picture by Joel Meyerowitz, that set me on a new route. Whereas I'd been a documentary photographer photographing stories, now I was out looking for single amazing images that encapsulated a moment of life. So, street photography is a difficult phrase. I don't think it really explains what we do. It implies everything taken on the street is a street photograph. And it's not really about a place, I don't think. It's about an approach to photography. It's a way of seeing. And I prefer this phrase. This is a phrase which I've been pushing for 2 or 3 years. And I think this describes better what we all do as street photographers. We take candid photographs. They're not staged. We don't intervene. We We don't take part in the scene, we just stand back and observe. They're public photographs, so they're all shot in a public place. And that's not just the street. As I said, that can be a park or a museum or an art gallery. And they're photographs. Photography, photograph literally means drawn with light, not drawn with a computer afterwards, not manipulated, retouched, composited. And so that pins down much better the kind of work that we're doing. So this is a website that I created, and I encourage people to use this hashtag. Actually, there it is, CanPubPhoto. And so I suggested this about 2.5 years ago. There's now about 100,000 images on Instagram using this hashtag. And photographers use the hashtag just to say, this is a documentary photograph, it's not a manipulated or composited photograph. And I think it's something that's important because you don't know what you're looking at these days. There's so much photography about, you look at a picture and you don't know what it is and how it was made. And how a picture is made is very important. It affects its meaning. So I'm going to show you some of my color street photography. And I spend a lot of time looking for pictures, a bit like Joel Meyewitz's image, which maybe have a humor or a wit to them, because it makes them very engaging with people. So I think there's a humor in this picture, for example. But also this picture tells us about the City of London and the high land values that are there. The City of London is constantly being redeveloped. And there are always construction workers besides men in smart suits everywhere you go. And for as long as I've lived in London, that has been the case. And often with these kind of photographs, you'll see something. I saw the men with the bald heads here, and I followed them. And I was just looking for something to come the other way. I curate photographs in the street, so I find my first element. Sometimes it's a static element, sometimes it's a moving element. And then I try to bring something else together with it and make more and more complex pictures. So hopefully they're funny, but also they have this social, cultural, historical element. This is on Broadgate in London, and sometimes I work very hard for a photograph. I'll find a scene and I'll spend an hour there. And other times, a photograph will just come down the street towards me, and I just have to make it as quickly as I can. I took 16 pictures of this man. He got on a train, and my last picture is taken through the train window, and he's sitting with the ball on his lap. This is a picture I made after 9/11. I think I was just sensitive to the sight of a passenger plane. It was taken in London, and this is a model, a 1 meter model hanging in the window of a travel agent's. It's not a real aeroplane. And you can see the importance of light in photography. I mean, we would be nowhere as photographers without light. And the quality of light, the direction, the quantity, the color temperature, it all affects the atmosphere and what we can do and what we can convey as photographers. I mean, a lot of photographers will introduce light. I spend most of my time finding it. But I will show you some projects in a minute where I work with light that I introduce. This is from a series I shot at Piccadilly Circus in London. Piccadilly Circus is 200 years old this year. It's 200 years since Lord Shaftesbury laid the junction out there. And I like this photograph, but it also talks about how teenagers now all want to be famous. You ask them what they want to do in life, and instead of saying a career, they say, I want to be famous. And spending your birthday in a limousine is one of the things that teenagers in London seem to want to do. This picture is in the collection of the Museum of London. This is from the National Portrait Gallery in London. And one of the things that when you watch people a lot, you see that people often repeat their behavior. So if I see somebody do something like yawn, or I see a guy squeeze his girlfriend's bum, if I carry on watching, generally in the next 2 minutes, they'll do it again. And this lady was talking about this picture, and I just knew that if I waited another minute or so, she would do it again, and that's when I got the shot. Sometimes I get commissioned to do photography, and street photography is a very difficult thing, obviously, to do as a commission because you can't control anything. So somebody pays me to go out, and I just have to find things. So this was photographed for PricewaterhouseCoopers, the auditing company, and they sent me out to take pictures of things which aren't what they first appear to be. So this is a fountain, not a can of fizzy drink exploding. Sometimes I will just find a nice piece of architecture, a nice piece of space, or I'll find a way of dividing the frame. So this frame is completely divided in half, by this architecture here. At the base of this stairs, there was a cycle rack where people stored their bicycles. So people kept on leaving, and if I waited long enough, I knew that I could get people in the right space. But sometimes these pictures that look like a quick snap will take me 2.5 hours of waiting and watching to make. Street photographs work in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes they're funny, as we've seen. Sometimes they're tragic. Sometimes they're beautiful. Sometimes they're about gesture. Sometimes they're about color. And this is a junction in London which I pass regularly. When I teach street photography in London, I quite often take people down here. And there's this wonderful, colourful building which I've always admired. And sometimes there's a red bus passes, and I have 3 colours. But today, it was recycling day, and all the bins were out, and they were digging up the road. So I had all these extra colours, a green, a yellow, and a blue. And what I do is find the best place to stand to capture this scene. And if you find a beautiful scene, you have half your photograph. You have 50% of it already, and you just have to wait for people to populate your photograph, to bring it alive. So I'm standing in the road, watching my scene, waiting for somebody to come past. And I like this picture because I think these words here look like they're coming out of the back of this man's head, like they're his thoughts. I also like the echo here of this shape. I teach street photography at photography festivals all over the world, and I was teaching at the Milan Street Photography Festival, so this is a picture from Milan. I had a couple of days free to make pictures, and I'm always trying to bring elements together and make a dialogue between them that creates a new meaning or new humor or statement in some way. So this guy here was entertaining the traffic by spinning round, and then he would go and collect money from the cars. But to me, he looked like the drawing of Vitruvian Man. I think that's Leonardo, is that Leonardo da Vinci, Vitruvian Man? Which is obviously the perfect figure of a male figure. And I took lots of pictures, but when this gentleman came across in a sort of damaged state, I guess, it just seemed like a very symbolic combination. Now, I use all sorts of devices in the street. Often these hoardings can create a nice artificial horizon where you can get rid of the whole of the city, all the mess, and just have a few smaller elements, make a graphic and simple picture. Now, I think I have a video, let me see. Oh, no, not yet. I have a video of me shooting on the streets, and that's one of the pictures. This is another one from Piccadilly Circus. I find that when you go back to the same place again and again, you really see life unfolding. So, today there was some models and a fashion shoot going on. I have a picture of a man having a heart attack on the steps of Eros in Piccadilly Circus. You only get those pictures when you put in a lot of time and you return again and again. But slowly you build up an extraordinary, series of images from that place. Composition is something which I'm really keen on. One of the things that I teach is to keep these lines in your photographs parallel with the edge of the rectangle. So you see these lines here are parallel with this. All these lines are parallel with the bottom of the frame. And it's one of those things which just helps make a photograph into a picture. It just elevates a photograph a little bit. If I'd taken this picture at an angle, then there would be vanishing point, and it wouldn't be so graphic. And the figures, which are the important bit, they wouldn't be so prominent. So you can try and make street photographs happen, but you also need a lot of luck. So I saw these Japanese schoolboys getting up, and I knew that they would jump down from the Nelson's column. So I got ready for that shot. What I got was this nice line of people jumping down in different stages, and that was a piece of luck. I wasn't expecting that. So you prepare yourself, but you're not always sure what you're going to get. You do need a bit of luck. This is a picture from South Beach in Miami. And on the beach, you can see there's the art festival. I think it's Art Basel, Art Miami. And like the hoarding that I showed you before, it creates an artificial horizon. And I realized that I could make the sky look like it was being held up. Excuse me. So having found that composition, I then spent 40 minutes trying to get the ball in the middle. This is from Los Angeles earlier this year. I was teaching a workshop on Hollywood Boulevard, and I just thought this was fabulous. This is the kind of thing which I love. It appeals to my sense of humor, and that sense of humor is one of the things which makes my pictures different from everybody else's. All of you going out with a camera will be drawn to different things to me because, some of you will have a background in art and maybe drawn to colors or, classical education or something, drawn to different things. I don't know. One of the nice things about modern digital cameras is that the quality is so good. You have these big sensors, and the photographers of 50 or 60 years ago who were shooting on film, they had to get quite close. They would see a scene and they'd have to shoot it fairly close, because if they stood back too much, there just wasn't enough information in the picture. It would be grainy, there'd be dots. But our photographs, allow us to stand back, make a huge picture that still works, that still reads. So this is taken at Victoria in London. And I guess there's like 60, 70 meters across this picture, but you can, there's still the quality there to make a big picture like that. This is from the Museum of London, the British Museum. And sometimes you just see things that are beautiful and you just have to make a photograph. And this arrangement of these sleeping girls was just something. I don't normally photograph children, or probably don't normally photograph young girls, but sometimes it just had to be taken. It was just a beautiful arrangement. I quite like this guy here as well. There's something classical about this arrangement. This is a picture from London Bridge. Beautiful light. I liked this. This is what I stopped for. This was my first element that I'm always looking for. And so I started making pictures there. I think I took 250 photographs over an hour and a half, something like that, until I got this picture which I think has order. I'm looking for order out of chaos. All the people are equidistant. There's a girl, there's a man, there's a girl, there's a man, there's a girl. And then these sort of shadows and newspapers. Everything is exploding out of the left-hand side of the picture. If you stand in a space long enough, you can learn how that space works. This tour bus came past every 15 minutes. And I knew that if I just waited, each time, I'd have this lovely juxtaposition of, I think this is a Roman aqueduct, I'm guessing. And it's juxtaposed with the Georgian architecture of London in a beautiful way. So that was the picture that I saw. This was the piece of luck which I needed. I mean, for her to come across with the same coloured phone is, fantastic. But I probably took about, 200 photographs with no luck. So as a street photographer, you're living with failure pretty much most of the time. And I reckon I get maybe 15 photographs like this a year that I'm really pleased with. They're quite rare. Street photographs can be very simple. You don't need a man having a heart attack. You don't need an accident happening in the road. Sometimes the simplest thing can be beautiful. This is outside the National Gallery in London. And I think the shadow here is very important. It's an important part of the picture. This is a picture from a project called The French. I lived in France for 9 years when I had small children, and I didn't really know the country at all. I bought a house there, moved there, and I had a bit of a love-hate relationship with the country. A lot of English people do. And I wanted to set out and discover the country through photography. So I had no preconceptions, no preconceived ideas. I just would drive to the biggest cities in France, park my car, and I'd set off with a small camera and let photography show me what France was about. And all sorts of themes came out of the picture making. I realized that France has a very proud heritage of fashion and cuisine and tradition and culture, but it's being eroded by Anglo-American culture. McDonald's are opening up in every town. I went to some country festivals in the Alps, and people were line dancing and doing rodeoing, This is a nice picture. I was in a small village, and this little boy ran out of the door and started waving this flag incredibly vigorously. And I took 15, 16 pictures, and then his parents arrived behind him. And they told me that they were clearing their attic, their loft, at the top of the house. And they'd just found his grandfather's Second World War tunic and flag. And so this child is wearing his grandfather's war clothing, but with torn jeans and sandals. This is Grenoble. There's a Bastille fort high above Grenoble, and children were abseiling from one tower to the other. And I think it's an example of how what you exclude from a photograph is as important as what you include in a photograph. And I like the scale of this huge vista with this figure. If you look closely, you can see that the child is wearing a harness. Here we go. This is a French, looks like Texas, but this is a French country village in the Alps outside Annecy. And I was talking about how you can make these great big pictures because of the quality of modern digital cameras. This is a good example. There's so much going on in this picture. A bit like that Joel Meyerowitz picture that I showed you from Paris. There's lots of things happening, and you can look around and see them all. And my favorite element of this picture is just this lady here. She's right in the middle, walking past, nothing to do with it, but absolutely central to the picture working. This is in Lyon. They were promoting the countryside in the city. So I try to fill the frame now, put something everywhere, in every corner. This is Le Touquet on the north coast of France, out of season. This is also in Lyon. I don't know what was going on then. Sometimes you just see things, sometimes ambiguity is very much part of street photography. You know, sometimes you'll pass a couple in a side street and you don't know whether they're arguing or kissing. You know, there's an ambiguity to it, that's just the way that life is, and that's what we capture as well as street photographers. That's another small village in France. I think in France, when it's lunchtime, and you just have to go. It's probably the same here. This is in London again. I like working in art galleries. This was a commission shoot at an art gallery in Manchester. And I was really struggling. There wasn't many people about. It was very quiet. But I came through this doorway, and this is what I saw. Sometimes a picture is just presented to you, and you just have to make it. Okay, this is the British Museum. They have an incredible glass roof, and when the sun is out, you get this beautiful checkered pattern all over the museum. And this is one of those situations where I find some static figures. I make a nice composition. I manage to get somebody up above as well, otherwise everybody's on the same level. But I have a gap, and I just wait for somebody to walk into the gap who's interesting, you know, pushing something, carrying something, or taking a photograph. So I'll show you a little bit of video. I have a YouTube channel where I teach street photography, and I have this unique way of doing it where I show people my actual viewfinder. I record what I'm seeing. So I'll show you that, just a few seconds of me taking some pictures. It'll give you a sense of what a street photographer looks like when he's working. So he's good up there, isn't he? He's really strong with the characters down below. Just fill that gap with passers-by. See how long this stays. He's good. Nice. Move into the gap for me. Yeah. There it is. Look at that, people. Look at that. Nice balance. Gorgeous. Nice. Now look at this couple that have just arrived here on their telephones. Sorry. I like them. Yeah, he was good. Some workmen just showed up. This is interesting. Sorry. So she's posing for a picture while the workmen are still working in the background. So you can see a little bit how I get those pictures. So that obviously the world is constantly changing. I can't control anything apart from that rectangle and the moment that I choose. Those are the only tools. So yeah, basically I've been a newspaper photographer. I've shot advertising campaigns and fashion and had front pages and exhibitions and books. But going out with a little camera on the street is the hardest thing I've ever tried to do with a camera. And that's why I'm still a street photographer. That's why I keep coming back to it. It's the biggest challenge in photography as far as I'm concerned. Okay, now I'm going to show you some projects that I've been working on recently. This is me working in South London in the rain, in the cold, and I'm photographing people, commuters, traveling home at night by bus. And I'm working with a longer lens now. This is still candid public photography, but it's working not in the traditional way that a street photographer would work with a short lens. I'll show you some of these pictures. So I made these pictures between about 5 o'clock and 7:30 on a weekday. These are people who mostly work in the financial district in London, and they're commuting home to the suburbs. And for me, it's an interesting time because they're not at work, they're not at home. At work, you have your work colleagues. At home, you have your family and children. But in between, there's a kind of space where I think you're actually yourself. You're not in acquaintance with people you know. And I think these pictures are actually they capture people at a time when they're being themselves, I think. I think they're quite honest portraits. And in the winter months, there's a lot of condensation and rain, and the pictures become quite painterly. And one of the things I discovered early on was that if I don't include the bus window, I shoot so tight that you can't see the window, then you can't tell what the pictures are initially. It takes you a while to interpret what you're seeing. So these pictures were shown at the Museum of London at the end of last year. I had an email from a lady who was at the exhibition and saw herself in one of the pictures and got in touch. Nobody seems to mind. She just wanted a print of herself. So the project is called On the Night Bus, and it was published as a book in November 2017. And it took me three years to shoot, 3 winters I was making these pictures. Sometimes it's difficult to know when you've finished a project, when you've expended all the possibilities. Beautiful colours. So here I'm working with the artificial light in the buses, the fluorescent lights, tungsten lights. Sometimes there's the lighting from vehicles behind, the one with the big red light behind a bit earlier. This one is the brake lights from a passing bus. So I had one frame with the red light. All the other frames were just dark behind. This, I think, looks like Medusa. Yeah, so this is the book On the Night Bus. This is my next project. This is a project called Autos. I'm interested now in these aspects of modern life. So commuting was one of them. And this is to do with advertising and the commercialization of everyday life. These pictures are taken in Piccadilly Circus. I knew I wanted to do a project about advertising, but it took me quite a while to find a clever and beautiful way of doing it. And then I tried photographing people with the light of advertising on them, like Coca-Cola Red. In Piccadilly Circus, obviously, there are huge advertising screens. And then I realized that the cars, the shiny new cars passing through the city, reflected these adverts beautifully. Sometimes they were reflecting, car adverts on the cars. A car being probably one of the most expensive things you'll purchase. This is an advert for China Airways. in a Range Rover. So I get an idea, and then I have to work out how I can do it technically. So these are taken on a 300mm lens, which is quite long, at night, which is quite difficult. But also, I needed lots of depth of field. I needed lots sharp. So I had to use quite a small aperture, which is very difficult at night. Shooting at f11 at night is quite tricky. And these are projects which I couldn't have done 8 or 9 years ago because we didn't have this technology. The sensors on the cameras were not good enough, and the lenses were not image stabilized. Now lenses have image stabilization, which allows you to shoot at much slower shutter speeds. Just see a guy here. And what I like about them is I think they echo pop art, like screen-printed pop art from the 60s, where there are found logos and typography, like this. And we all recognize these colors and these logos. You know, they're part of modern culture. You don't even need to see all of them. So in some ways, although I'm a documentary photographer, I'm now kind of working a little bit where documentary meets art, in that sort of interesting little area, where the pictures are very visual. Can't quite see here, but there's a hand holding a mobile telephone here. Okay, here's a little video of me shooting this project. A film crew came down and filmed me for a documentary recently, and I got a little bit of a clip from them. So you can see me making these pictures. I'll show you a little bit of this, not the whole thing. There's a nice Mercedes, Xbox down the side of it. Sorry, please. Members of the public are stopping for me. Thank you. So what's really interesting is that the colours that come up, even though I only see the colour, I know it's Coca-Cola red, or I know it's Xbox green. We all know this branding now. So there's so many photographers here that I can just work here pretty freely. Nobody really, is bothered. I got a slightly bigger lens than everybody else, but the lights are red. There's no good cars really. There's an old Volvo, but I don't think it's shiny enough for me. There's a shiny Mercedes. Another watch in the window. Now blue. Okay, that's probably enough of that. I can see you might all start yawning in a minute if I go on too long. So I'm going to show you a couple of projects where I do introduce light. Most of these are commercial things. Some of them are personal projects. This is me working in Iceland for a big American medical company. And you can see I'm using these tiny little snooted flash guns. I have a little piece of black foil to direct the light. It allows me to shape the light as I wish, make it as small or as big or different shape. And as soon as I'm using light, I can control the environment with the camera. I can make the ambient light darker, make the skies more dramatic. And this came about when I was living in New York. You would see the sun bouncing off 2 skyscrapers, the glass, and you'd have a little pool of light at street level, and people would walk in and out of this little pool of light, and it would last for 3 or 4 minutes, and I would take pictures, and then the sun would move, and it would be gone. And I knew that if I could create that pool of light artificially, it could be really beautiful. I could make beautiful portraits with it. And so I basically created this system using a big pole to get the angle of the light to mimic the sun. If it was too low down, it looked artificial. Often I would warm the flashes up. I'd use a gel, which would make them a nice color temperature, which would look natural. And this is the kind of picture that it produced. So that's a commercial application of the project. I'll show you some of the personal projects that I did with this technique. So I'm working with two assistants. They each carry one of my flash guns, and I have a microphone on my sleeve, and they have headphones. So while I'm taking the picture, I speak to them and ask them to take a step back or where I want the flashes. These are from a project called The Bridge. And this is Blackfriars Bridge in London, one of the big bridges over the River Thames. And I just stood in the middle, and I just stopped interesting people and asked if I could make a portrait of them. Sometimes I saw them doing something, and I would ask them, could you do that again? This guy's photographing St. Paul's Cathedral. So we have one little light up here, one down here. So most of these were made in less than 2 minutes each. Because people are going somewhere, I have to work very quickly. And again, 15 years ago, I couldn't really do this. You know, in the old days, we used to pull a Polaroid to see if the lighting was correct. And people wouldn't wait that long, strangers. So the project became a survey of the people that used that bridge. Two brothers. He just did that. I didn't ask him to do that. All sorts of different types of people. So that was the Bridge project. This is a project called Youth, where I photograph teenagers on the streets of London, young people, waiting outside a concert venue. This is Oxford Street. And sometimes I would stand across the street shooting between the crowds to get these shots. No, these are all with the little flashes. Yeah. So when you're shooting with a flash outside, you have quite a lot of control. You can control the ambient light with your shutter speed, and you can control the strength of the flash with the aperture to some extent. It's a young guy sketching in Oxford Street. This is in New York. I shot some over there. This is outside NYU. Okay, I'm just going to show you two more projects and then I'll let you all go. This is a project on London Bridge. This is using a lens with a very fine depth of field. And that's kind of the language of portraiture. When you do a portrait of somebody, often you will use this shallow depth of field to throw the background out of focus. So I tried to use the cameras that a press photographer would use so that I could make portraits of people as I passed them. So they're going in the opposite direction to me. So I look down the street for somebody interesting. I get in the right part of the pavement. Often I'll pretend to photograph the architecture, and at the last minute I look down, and as they pass me, I'll take 10 frames in a second, and it's all over. So again, that's kind of a survey. I'm using photography to explore, you know, what kinds of people use this bridge and pass through from the city. This is a project called Phonation, which I shot at Waterloo Station. Waterloo Station in London has a white floor. And if you stand up on a mezzanine above and look down, it looks like a studio. It looks like a white studio somewhere. And I wanted to photograph people using mobile telephones, how people stood. You know, this is the way we all stand in public now, like this. I'm sure it happens here, but it certainly happens in London. Everybody's got their heads down looking at their telephones. And I just wanted to explore that. This guy's got 2 telephones. You know, we're going to evolve like this, I think. So these are candid public photographs. They're documentary pictures of people. I'm exploring a theme. And this is the last thing I wanted to show you, just because it's a bit different to my usual work. This is a car park, a supermarket car park, where teenagers go, and young men, and they meet at night in the early hours of the morning, and they drive their cars very fast and spin around. I call the project Donuts. And I went in the early hours of the morning 5:30 before, I had to go before anyone came to park. And I take a big ladder, like a 12-step ladder, and I put the big ladder up and I climb to the top. And as the sun is coming up, I'm taking pictures, just the only person there. It's quite an odd business. But they make kind of abstract art in a way. But also, it explores an aspect of car culture. These are going to be published this year. So there's lots of ways of being a documentary photographer. Lots of different ways of approaching it. Okay, that's all I have to show you. If you have any questions, please do follow my work online. I'm always posting new work on Instagram. My latest projects are always up there, and as I travel, I put new work up there. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Nick. That's great. I'll break the ice. How do you manage privacy issues, and is it an issue, or do you have freedom to take anybody's picture and publish it and profit off of it?
This is a commonly asked question. Yeah. So what I do is considered an art use, and I can publish and exhibit these pictures, but I can't use them for any commercial use. So none of my photographs can I sell to an advertising agency. So basically I have two responsibilities. One, I mustn't imply an endorsement of a product in the way that the picture is used, and I mustn't misrepresent the people in the picture. So I can't sell it for editorial use with a caption which implies something different to the truth. So those are the two rules, really. In terms of taking pictures in a public place, in most democratic countries, you can photograph anything you can see from a public place. Some countries like France have a privacy law where you can't publish that photograph, but you can take it. You can't publish it without permission. But in the UK, it's, we're a democratic country. What happens in a public place is a matter of public record, and that's an important aspect of a democratic country. So what we do is important, I think.
What's your favorite Instagram filter?
I don't use it. Very provocative. Yeah, no, I don't believe in retouching or. I'm trying to document what I see in front of the camera. So the only changes that I make to my images are to make corrections. I'm not interested in creating an effect, really. But I think you knew that.
I'm curious about the series dedicated to the teenager. In that case, you use the light to create an atmosphere, the same, or do you work with post-production? And how is important post-production in your photograph?
No, the lighting is completely made in the street at the time. Mm-hmm. So basically just technically, I will underexpose the picture. The daylight is 1 stop or 1.5 stops darker than normal, which is why the skies are so dramatic on the bridge and things, because they're dark, they're underexposed. And then I compensate with the flash. So I use the flash to fill in, to balance the light. Flash gun, the strobe, has this black foil, tin foil, I don't know what. So I make the light small. I make a spotlight, basically, by modifying the flash gun.
And then I'm fascinated by your capacity of being concentrated of things. Do you distract yourself? It happens that you don't catch something? Because I think it's
You mean when I'm out taking the pictures?
You look at the reality
from
a camera, I think. Like a camera.
I think it's, to me, it's like meditation, being a street photographer.
Yeah.
I lose
about
myself
meditation.
When I'm out taking pictures. Sometimes I'll go out and shoot from 9 o'clock till 4 o'clock. And at 4 o'clock, I'll realize that I haven't had any lunch, and I'm desperate for the toilet. And I've completely forgotten those things, because I've been watching other people all day, and the silly things they do, that I just completely forget myself, really, until my feet start aching, or I have to go have a drink of water or something. To me, it's like it is like a meditation, the act of photography, really. And I like it. I like that feeling of losing myself, Yeah.
Of course, you are a great observer, but I think that's also an important relational part in your activity. So how do people react to your photographs? Are they suspicious or just curious?
Do you mean if they see me taking pictures?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm 6'3" with a shaved head, but nobody ever sees me. They virtually never see me take a picture. And it's to do with the way that I present myself in a public space. Quite often, if I want to photograph you, I won't face you. Quite often I'll stand like this, if you're my subject, and I'll watch you, but I'll be looking at architecture or other things. Sometimes I'll eat an apple or get a map out or look at my phone. I never make eye contact with you. I have strategies that I use on the street to look like I'm not taking photographs. Very occasionally somebody will see me and I will just give them a random reason why I took the photograph. I'll just say, I like your dress, I love your hat, beautiful light. Just one word and people are usually happy. People are just worried that you chose them. Why did you pick me out of the crowd? Why me? And if you just give them a random reason, they usually...
That works.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, I tend not to stop walking, so... Yeah. I have a friend, he runs the San Francisco Street Photography Festival. And he's got a load of pictures of people that he's taken on the street of people going like that to him. And I said to him, what are you doing on the street that everybody sees you? And he obviously works in a different way to me, I think he should come and do a workshop with me. I'll show him how to be invisible.
Hi, Nick. I have a question, because at the beginning of the presentation you said that nowadays everyone can be a photographer because we have our smartphones and we can take pictures. But when you started 30 years ago, it was different. So, how's everything started? I mean, what's your passion for photography from?
Originally?
Where it's from, yeah.
Originally, I went to art college and I was going to be a painter. And I started using a camera to photograph scenes that I wanted to paint. And slowly, I became more excited by the act of making the pictures than I did about painting them afterwards. And I basically changed the direction of my education to pursue photography. I never planned to be a newspaper photographer. That was just an opportunity. It was a job I was offered and I was 20. I couldn't turn it down, And I think it took me a while to find my own, what I wanted to do with photography. So I still consider myself, in a way, an artist who uses a camera. Maybe, I don't know if I consider myself a photographer, perhaps. I don't know if that sounds pretentious, but, I think I just use it as a medium, a tool. But things have certainly changed. I mean, I used to travel abroad, like for the independent newspaper, with 3 big flight cases. I used to take a full darkroom, with chemicals and everything. I used to take a big wiring machine to send the pictures back to London. I used to have a camera case and then my clothes. And just traveling to do a story, even somewhere in Europe, you had to take all of this stuff. Now you could do all of that, take the picture and get it back with a smartphone. So technology in that time has changed so dramatically. I mean, my career has been a process of constantly evolving. I've had to evolve constantly to make a living and continue to be a photographer. So it has changed a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. Well, thanks, Nick. Well, please join me with a quick round of applause for Nick. Thanks, Nick. That was incredible.
Thank you
Your
for having
pictures
me.
are fantastic.
Thank you.
So, Nick, we have a tradition here in
Oh.
Iguzzini. If you give a conference, you give a great talk like this,
You hit me on the
then
head with a
you
box.
have to take a pizza home with you. This is an Iguzzini pizza called the
Oh.
Pizza Cobra. It's a special lamp designed by Ron Ared,
Oh,
designed by
wow.
Iguzzini.
my
We're not going
goodness.
to have you open the box right now, but it's basically this.
Oh, it's beautiful.
This is,
Oh, it's one of
this is what it
these.
is. You
Oh,
see
I'm
it?
so grateful.
Do you see it
That's
folds?
incredible.
It folds up.
We put down, it's like a pizza.
It folds up like a
It's
pizza.
amazing. It's amazing.
It's a
Thank
work
you
of
so
art.
much. I'm really grateful. Could you thank the interpreter for me as well?
Yes,
She's done a great job.
Interpreter,
Thank
thank you. Grazie.
you. Thank you for having me.
great.
It's been a pleasure.
Pose for a picture. Pose for a picture.
Thank you.